Welcome to Equity in Every Drop, a podcast from WaterkeeperAlliance. In this series, we're taking a closer look at defending clean water from the threats of plastic pollution, toxic chemicals, and nonpoint source pollution. We will be diving into the challenges we face and the progress we're making to protect our waterways and restore fragile ecosystems. So whether you're a seasoned environmental advocate or just beginning to learn about these critical issues, we invite you to join us as we amplify our mission to ensure clean, safe, and accessible water for all. Let's jump right in. Our guest today is Chelsea McDonald. Chelsea is the Clean Water Defense Manager here at WaterkeeperAlliance, where she works with a wide range of stakeholders to defend and enforce clean water laws, standards, and permits, and fight against the ever-growing threats to clean and safe water. Prior to joining us here at WaterkeeperAlliance, Chelsea worked at the Department of Justice in the Environment and Natural Resources Division and as a staffer in the United States Senate. In 2023, she received her JD from Georgetown Law as a graduate of their evening program. She received her BA from Lake Forest College in political philosophy, sociology, and anthropology, and we are so thrilled and lucky to have her here today. Chelsea, my friend, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Know where I would rather be.
Excellent. So for everyone who doesn't have the great honor of working with you, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do here at WaterkeeperAlliance as the Clean Water Defense Campaign Manager?
Yeah, so as campaign manager, which is something any of our campaigning managers would do, I help plan strategies for trying to push both the United States government and global authorities like the UN and other governments forward on the policies that are important to us. For my campaign, that's clean water defense. So we're talking a lot about toxics and plastics, as well as things like the Waters of the United States rule or the Endangered Species Act and a lot of other different things that come up.
I'm hearing a lot about these things in the news lately too, not just from working here, but it seems like it's kind of a current issue. So without getting too deep into that, let's just talk, I guess, in general about some of the threats that you just sort of touched on. And I know some of the things you work on, so I'm cheating here a little bit, but just kind of going through them at like a high level. Can we talk a little bit about some of the threats that, let's just start with, plastic pollution poses, and then maybe what WaterkeeperAlliance is doing about this?
Yeah. So as you kind of alluded to, there's like the threats that already exist and then the future possible threats from what's happening in the world more politically right now. In terms of what's currently going on in your water, the vast majority of water sources, if not all, are going to have microplastics in them, which I think a lot of times when we think about plastics pollution, we're thinking about like the very sad photo of the turtle with the straw in his nose, which is obviously bad, but it's not just these big pieces of plastic that we see in like the media photos. It's really, which we're working to address. But we're also working to address what are these called microplastics. They are as they sound. They're really, really small. They're inside all of us right now. And that also means they're inside wildlife. And also studies have really been showing, though, that like they're in so many of our organs, especially there's a lot of them inside our brains. It's very hard to avoid them, both from food containers or if you're drinking soda out of a plastic soda bottle or even just the water that's coming straight from the tap. And really, all that means is that those are chemicals that are in our bodies that we didn't evolve with. And so they're having reactions inside of us. And we don't fully know the scope of it right now, but we do know a lot of cancers are coming from it and other concerns. And so we're really trying to figure out how do we try to fix this problem when it's already so spread out and so advanced in both our waterways and our bodies.
I mean, we could talk just about this for this whole episode, and I don't want to like give everything away because I know we're going to talk about this more in a later episode, but the plastic production is not going down either, right? I mean, it's like spiking, right? And what I find so concerning too is that's happening. The plastic production, we know it's dangerous. We know it's in our brains and in our organs and in our babies and in our food and everything else. And we're not doing anything to slow down the production of it. And recycling is like non-existent, right?
Well, so recycling is just not at all what we've been led to believe it is, right? Like in terms of all growing up, it was always like the environmental kid in class, which would be me, right, is, like, trying to be like, "Oh, if we recycle, then the whole world's saved, like, we just have to do that on Earth Day." But in reality, about I think it's less than 7% of all the plastic that we've put in recycling bins is getting recycled. So that's, like, a very small amount. And also, they have to think about what it means to recycle plastic. For a lot of it, it means that they're incinerating it, they're burning it so they can remake it into something else. And what are the communities that are living around the incinerators? So then there's arguments around, like, is it even that 7%, is it even really worthwhile if we're talking about the people's healths of what who are, like, breathing in all of this stuff? And it becomes really, really complicated really fast versus before it was like, "Don't worry. If you have that plastic bottle, just put it in the blue bin."
Yeah, and then with that recycled bottle, maybe I'm thinking about this incorrectly, but it's like, okay, so you do get it recycled, and then there's what, like another 7% chance that that gets recycled again, and so you just created
Mhm.
another toxic product that's going to stay in the ecosystem, and really the problem seems to be at the source. But again, I don't want to dive too deep into it. It's terrifying, and it's also really for me like frustrating, and it makes me like upset, I guess for lack of a better term, that we have this known danger. And you talked about the plastic straw and the turtle. It used to be the 6-pack soda rings choking an otter or something, something other equally heartbreaking. And it puts all this onus on the individual. It's like, oh, well, don't forget to recycle your plastic bottle, when really the problem is so much more pervasive and beyond our control, beyond the consumer's control, like at their fingertips. So we know this is a problem. Again, I'm trying to just temper myself because I would just talk about this for the full time. And I know we want to get to other stuff. What's being done about this on a local, national, international level? Like, what is Waterkeeper Alliance's role in taking on this terrible problem?
Yeah. So one thing that literally any individual can do to get involved is Waterkeepers putting together what we're calling the International Plastic Pellet Count with PERG and a few other environmental nonprofits. That is going to be happening on May 3rd of 2025. We're going to put together a whole resource guide so you're able to know how to do this. So there's no barrier to entry. And literally, you and your family or you alone can go to a waterway or a beach or even a marsh and go look for plastic pellets. And it takes literally just as few as 10 minutes to be able to
Hmm.
submit data that then can be used in litigation against plastic companies that are putting, I guess to take a step back, pellets are what are being produced by plastic manufacturers that then get shipped around the country and sometimes around the world to be used to make things.
Is that like nurdles?
Yeah, nurdles is another name for them. But so those then aren't considered pollutants by the Environmental Protection Agency when they spill. So they spill quite a lot. And so we're trying
Right.
to really change that, but we need help collecting data throughout the world. And so there's going to be all sorts of events that day, both from local water keepers and local groups if you want to join, or even you can just go out alone. So please reach out to me or check our website or PERG's website for information on how to get involved with that.
Absolutely. And we'll include some information about that in the show notes and share information about that. Yeah. And like you said, for anyone interested in that, just keep following us on social media and check our website because we'll definitely communicate more about that. Is there anything else that we should touch on with plastic, or should we talk about some of the other terrifying things that keep us all up at night?
Yeah. I would just say that upcoming in this summer is going to be another round of negotiations of the Global Plastics Treaty. Waterkeeper Alliance is involved in trying to push all of the countries around the world to have a strong agreement. But that is another like big touch point, I guess, for plastics. But now I can continue to tell you terrible things about what's inside your body right now.
It's time for the nightmare hour with Tom and Chelsea. So let's talk about some of these other terrifying threats to clean water. I wanted to ask you about what threats PFAS and other toxic chemicals pose. And then I wanted to ask you if I have this right. Is PFAS is per or polyfluoroalkyl substances? Am I right about that?
Yeah.
You're nodding yes. That's incredible. And that's just for my own edification. I'm so excited. I know what that stands for. And then I know some of the answers to this because I've worked here for a little while. But tell me about the threats that PFAS pose and what Waterkeeper Alliance has done about this and what we're planning to do about this.
Yeah. So PFAS is tricky because people talk about it and it sounds like it's one thing, but that's like referring to a group of 14,000 chemicals.
Huge number.
A huge number. They come from a good place, right? Back in the 20s or the 30s, scientists were just trying to invent things, and they found these chemicals that then made things water resistant and flame proof, which are really good qualities for a lot of products. So they started putting them in all of the things that you would think wouldn't want to be waterproof. And that ranges though from raincoats and the things we would think of, but also like most children's pajamas are required under law to be flame retardant. So we're talking about a wide range of products. And it's only after we started incorporating these chemicals into so many things that we realized that they're incredibly dangerous for humans and also our environment. So they are also cancer causing, they cause endocrine disruptions, they cause reproductive issues. And that's kind of like the start of the list of the things we know about. There's 14,000 different types, which then makes it so EPA is often unwilling to say, like, we need to regulate all of the PFAS together. Because, like, what if one of those 14,000 doesn't actually cause these severe problems?
Right.
However, that means that EPA is going one at a time, and we only have regulations for about 6 of them currently, which is not at all sufficient for what we need
Out
to
of
be.
14,000.
Yeah, out of
That's
14,000.
that's pretty slow. Yeah.
Yeah, and which is a process that's taken so long. And also, quite honestly, it also means that chemical companies, if they wanted to, they would be able to just slightly change the formula so then they're avoiding the 6 that are regulated and instead can use one of the other 14,000 or invent something new. So it's just very insufficient in terms of what we've been seeing from our government in terms of trying to protect us from these chemicals.
And I know they have their nickname is sort of the forever chemicals, and that's because they last seemingly forever.
They basically don't break down when they're in natural environments. And then they're also resistant to water, resistant to fire. So it's also hard to break them down. And then
Oh
that
my
takes us
gosh.
back to our incinerator problem from earlier about these things being burnt and then put into the air around vulnerable communities.
Right. And so that's fun. We released a PFAS sort of survey, and I know we've done a lot of work with petitioning the government and Congress and EPA and things like that to take, more action about this. But where do things stand on our advocacy at this moment?
Yeah, so we are getting ready to release another phase of testing that we did throughout the country, and that testing will come out in summer of 2025.
And that's where, sorry to interrupt you, sorry. And that's by testing. Because for the first round, what we did was, and I believe this is the same for this round, our water keepers all over the United States, not every single one of them, but a significant amount, go to their waterways, right? And test with these kits. So it's,
Mhm.
this hugely coordinated effort. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to throw that out there for the listener because it was and is really impressive, the scope of this survey or testing or whatever report, whatever we want to call it. And it is also like confirms a lot of the fears that we have about the prevalence of this and everything else. So sorry. So you were saying this is coming out this summer?
Yeah, this summer. And thank you for I, like, have been living in it so long, it's often I feel like I'm, like, at the end of the story.
Yeah,
But so,
I get it.
in terms of this round of testing, though, the thing that's really interesting is we tested above and below wastewater treatment facilities and below what are called sludge fields. And I don't know if we wanna turn our depressing hour into also a slightly gross hour, but I can teach you
Sure.
about sludge.
Sludge fields. Are sludge fields gross? They sound really fun.
And so in exciting news, sludge is something that's, like, onomatopoetically correct in terms of its name. It's talking about
What a great
everything that
use of
you
that word.
thank you, I try to use it
Yeah, I
right.
can't even say it. It was great.
And so it's basically when you think about everything that goes in a sewer from your place of work, like goes down a pipe, like from your place of work or from a house or from an industry, all of that ends up getting routed for the most part to a wastewater treatment facility, which is going to like filter out to try to make water that goes back into the rivers and goes back into our drinking supply. Sludge is everything that is filtered out and considered too dangerous to go in, and everything that gets caught in those filters. Then the thing is, though, that for a really long time, EPA has encouraged farmers to use sludge from wastewater treatment plants to apply to fields as fertilizer. which is a really eloquent solution for getting rid of this stuff, except for not only is the things in it that are what we would usually use as fertilizer, but also a bunch of toxic chemicals that we already decided was too dangerous for water, and also a bunch of PFAS. And then that's what's going on fields that crops are being grown in and also sit next to waterways, so it works its way back into water. And so our results are very alarming, but also not unexpected from that situation for the amount of PFAS that's coming into the water from the sludge fields.
I expected more of the sludge fields. I can't believe the sludge fields would be so disappointing. So yeah, so that's a lot. And a lot of this was very helpful because I think, yeah, just, I mean, in a very short amount of time, you kind of broke down the history of this and a lot of the problems with it. And I thought it was 1,400 compounds of PFAS. I mean, it's way more than that. And it is a moving target. It is like a very prevalent target as well. So, it's encouraging at least that, to me, like you were just saying, we work here and we're kind of like thinking about this stuff all the time. But PFAS seems to have at least crossover is something you would say for like a song, but it like has broken through. Like it's a crossover hit. It's gone mainstream, truly and unfortunately, but also in sort of our understanding of toxic waste, I guess. And I don't know. Hopefully that's a good thing because it'd be worse if nobody even knew what this was or couldn't remember what to call it or anything like that. So there at least seems to be some like literacy and understanding about this. I don't know if that'll translate to anything given our current climate and just the general slow pace of regulation and remediation. But maybe hopefully some reason to be hopeful, but who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I think we could talk forever about PFAS. I'm sorry about that terrible
Oh,
pun.
I don't
So let's
forgive
move.
you, Tom.
I appreciate that. I can't even look at in the screen right now. I'm so embarrassed for saying that. But we could talk a lot about it. But I know we're going to do a more dedicated discussion on this later in the series. So I will move us along. One thing that I just want to like tie in with this conversation on PFAS is something that I was just made aware of in the last year called 6-PPD, which I believe our Puget Soundkeepers or the Puget Soundkeeper team out in Seattle, Washington have really been on sort of like the vanguard of. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's like the new PFAS. I mean, I know it's not. Well, anyway, tell us about 6-PPD and I'll stop talking. How about that?
No, you're good. What a great lead-in. So, yeah, if you've only known about 6-PPD for a year, I'm only like 6 months ahead of you because it's not a new chemical, but it is something that we're new to understanding, which I think is a reoccurring theme in my work that a lot of like cats are out of boxes all over the place. But so in terms of 6-PPD, it's the chemical that's going to be in basically every tire that's made, and it's what makes a tire stable. So they've done a lot of studies where like you're going to just wear through your tread really fast or tires explode, which obviously is bad, and so this chemical helps prevent that, which is obviously a good thing. However, what we didn't know until I think 2001 is that when 6-PPD is running along the road in these tires, it's having a chemical reaction with the air, creating another chemical, which is called 6-PPDQ. And 6-PPDQ especially is nasty in that when it makes its way into water, it's going to have really rapid and disastrous effects for aquatic species. This is really first seen in many ways in coho salmon, which are a protected species in the Pacific Northwest, really iconic fish, which is why our Puget Soundkeeper is so involved. And coho that are impacted by 6-PPD basically just start losing it's like weird to describe it even, like it's like they called it zombie fish disease for a really long time before they knew it was called. Like, and it's fish swimming as if they were zombies. They lose their sense of direction, and then they can die in as little as an hour. And so we know it affects the salmon. We know also it affects similarly the trout species. So those then include like rainbow trout, which are found in watersheds throughout the United States, especially because they're a favorite of anglers to go catch. And so that's what we know.
Oh my God.
But also we didn't know that 6-PPDQ was even being created until 4 years ago. So it's a lot of understanding left to build. They're currently in like early stages of testing the impacts on mammals, and early studies are showing that causes some issues in the liver function of mice. And we have, again, no idea the full range of what this chemical can do, but we know it's killing fish within an hour. So it's probably not going to be good for humans.
But it's only on every tire of every car in the world, right? So that can't be that bad. That's actually, yeah, that's crazy and really concerning. And I'm just making a side point, which I know is not, this is just a point I want to make because I'm like a mass transit nerd, that electric cars will not save us. They will not save us. They're cool, they're better, but they still have tires. Go on. So you're going to say something. Sorry.
I was just going to give you a new talking point in which electric cars are actually so much heavier than normal cars that they've done studies that they wear through tires so much faster that they're actually putting more and more 6 ppd on the roadways than a normal car would be.
Jeez. All right. Well, that's a whole other conversation because I mean, I will talk about mass transit and electric cars and all that forever. But let's take me out of that. So we're talking about 6 ppd being this new and emerging threat to clean water that is we barely even knew it existed, or we're new to knowing it existed. And I was talking to Sean at Puget Soundkeeper over the summer, and he said something to the effect of that 6 ppd is the second most toxic chemical ever
Found in water.
That's insane. And it's been happening for decades. And it's just only on 4 tires on every car in the world. So
Yeah.
it's out there. That's happening right now as we speak. And that's really very scary. Is there any reason for me to feel anything but dread about that? Is there anything that we're doing about this, that Waterkeeper Alliance is doing, or that people listening, is there any actions or ways we can learn more about this?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is good news or if this is bad news, but the tire industry itself, as soon as we figured out how dangerous this chemical actually, like even just like started to realize like that this is what's causing the zombie fish
Mm-hmm.
disease, are really engaged in trying to find an alternative to this chemical, which is I've never seen an industry commit so much right away to trying to find a solution. But I think I've done this work too long because it makes me very nervous that even they are like, oh, we need to fix this right now. Like there's no equivalent of like, oh, just recycle and it'll be fine. Um,
They're not even going through the motions of pretending this is fine, that they're right to like, okay, our bad, we're going to do something about this.
yeah.
That's funny because it's a hopeful sign, but it's a real terrifying sign too.
But so like that's good, like right? They're engaging, they're doing research on like what are alternatives that can make tires still safe because that's obviously an important goal for people
Yep.
who aren't like you and I, Tom, committed to the New York subway system, but also not create these crazy chemicals, which also we keep talking about all the tires, which obviously there are so many, but also let's think about all of the like soccer fields that are made out of rubber
Right.
or the
Right.
playgrounds because they've been doing a bunch of studies and it's being found inside human bodies at quite high rates, including children who are playing on soccer fields. And so the concern, though, with what the industry is doing is the industry currently is investigating a bunch of different alternative chemicals. However, they have names like 7 ppd and 9 ppd. And so there's concern that even though they're working in good faith, are we just going to end up with this PFAS problem, right? Where like, yes, we have an alternative, but we're going to just like put in all of these tires and 20 years down the line, we're going to realize it's causing the same problems because also the
Right.
chemicals are not that different from each other, which is why Waterkeeper Alliance has been doing advocacy with the federal government, and Senator Merkley from Oregon has been a really good leader on this issue to try to get the federal government to also invest in this research and also do this work so that we just have kind of a less science that is less invested in by the companies, if that makes sense. So that's where our big push is because we both know it's really bad, but we don't have an alternative and we don't understand the extent of the problem currently.
Wow. I mean, yeah. I mean, the one thing I can take away is like at least we know, and we're not just driving around blindly causing this pollution and scratching our head as to why all the salmon and trout are dying and be turning into zombies. But that's a real uphill battle for sure. So just moving along on this hit parade of threats to clean water, we move now to something called nonpoint source pollution. And this is one of the greatest threats to clean water. Can you explain to our listeners what that means, non-point source pollution?
Yeah. So if you think about just like a waterway, let's say whatever like creek or river maybe is
Hmm.
running near you right now, and you think about a single pipe that's coming from an industrial plant that is clearly running into the water, that's going to be a point source pollution because we know it's coming from this single point. Versus non-point source pollution is when it's maybe a lot of different types of contributions. So there's not just that factory, but there's a road running along the side of the river that's putting out a bunch of 6-PPD. And also, for what it's worth, your tires are also producing microplastics and PFAS that are one of the largest sources of microplastics in human bodies. And maybe there's also sludge field, well, not even a sludge field, but just like
Sludge
crops being
fields.
grown on the other side of the field, and then the
Sure.
sludge is getting into the water, right? So it's when there's a bunch of different sources, and also maybe those sources aren't just getting in through a single pipe, but instead these kind of like rain events causing things to run into the water or different ways that it's finding its way in.
Is there something with like agriculture too? Did you already say that? That like
Yeah.
when we apply the animal waste from like a CAFO to a field and then the water or like it rains on the field and then that goes into the water, is that non-point source pollution as well?
Yeah, it is.
Covers a lot,
Yeah, or also, like, let's think about all of the pesticides that are sitting on those crops
right?
too, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, so it's really incredibly variable, and it's also, to be fair, hard to regulate, right? Because it's hard
Right.
to say, like, "This is the source of pollution, these are the people responsible, this is who," you know what I mean? Instead, it's this confluence of different events.
Confluence is the right word. Yeah. And you brought up this visual when you started talking about this. Like, yeah, there's like a factory next to a river and it's got a pipe and it's going right into the river. Like, that's clear. That's a clear discharge point. And this is more like not ephemeral, but just sort of like harder to pinpoint, but equally dangerous. And is it less regulated because of that, or is it harder to regulate or harder to tackle, like from discharge permits or things like that, because it's so, I want to say like loosey goosey. That's not the right word, but just because it's like not specifically from that pipe going right into the river.
It is harder to regulate just because it's harder to, like, clearly point to why something was caused, but there was a recent Supreme Court decision, I guess actually never 2020, I guess, is no longer recent, which is jarring for many reasons.
It's pretty jarring.
But so there was a Supreme Court decision in 2020 called Maui, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the Clean Water Act may require permits for indirect discharges of pollutants from non-point source solutions. But there's like caveats in terms of like, is the discharger equivalent to a direct discharger? And like identifying these things just still becomes hard. And also, we're talking about why people do things. It's normally because of, like, lawsuits and people being able to prove that they've been hurt in some way, and it becomes really hard for those plaintiffs to prove, "This is the reason why I have cancer," especially when we're talking about people who maybe live in areas where it's not just the one factory on the river, but some places there's 600 or, all along one watershed.
Yeah, that you remind me of like, is it like Highway 10 in Louisiana has all the refineries? Like, I know this is like a different topic, but they have like all the oil refineries. Like, it's like Cancer Alley or something. It's like, well,
Yeah.
who did it? There's like 1,000 culprits, and there's a lot of places like that, unfortunately, throughout the country. So let's talk about what our campaigns and what Waterkeeper Alliance is doing about this threat to clean water.
Yeah, so as we outlined, because it's so complicated, we're like addressing it through lots of different ways. So there's both like the litigation, like Maui, that we weren't a part of, but we have our legal team who's doing great stuff in a similar kind of vein. But then we also have our work right around addressing pollution from, I guess it's chemical source instead of its direct source, in terms of like trying to get rid of 6-PPD or trying to get rid of PFAS and trying to make it so we're just getting rid of these chemicals overall. So we don't have the factories and we don't have the consumer products and we don't have the trash. And we also have a different campaign that is working, especially on agriculture with pure farms, pure waters, and they're doing a lot of work to try to make farms safer.
That was the last 6 episodes we've done were all about that, and truly some experts here on that. It's within Waterkeeper Alliance and at our many Waterkeeper groups, throughout the South and the Midwest, and even it's all over. It's incredible. Yeah. So there's a lot being done. There's a lot of problems, but there's a lot being done. We've touched on a lot of topics here, and I know we're gonna get deeper into this as we proceed with this series and talk about these issues more in a more detailed way, which is going to be great. And I'm excited for this series, in a lot of ways. I guess when in thinking about, this big picture, there's a lot of reasons to feel despair and concern. Are there any reasons for concern that we haven't touched on? Or are there like bigger problems that we should know about, or
Yeah.
or is that enough?
As you can tell, I'm definitely super fun at parties. I think just in terms of the regulations we have are not enough. We're in a world in which those regulations that we even have are in question about how long they're going to be around. And so I think that's the real issue in terms of like this isn't what we've been told around you are the problem because you didn't recycle the bottle and you're the reason the trash exists. We need standards that everyone follows in order to actually get these things addressed. Because, like, I could spend all of my time on the internet trying to find the brands that avoid PFAS 1,000% and wear only linen clothes. But at the end of the day, if you, Tom, are buying the raincoat, there's still a factory that's still producing a thing that then is still finding its way in the water. We have to have collective action around this.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like extended producer responsibility, which I think may take us off course here a little bit. But it's a flag I fly a lot because it is this it's flipping this notion on the head. Like, well, did you use a plastic straw? Like, you're kind of the problem. You're like, no, I'm not the problem. Like, the corporations are the problem, and the lack of government oversight is the problem. And these companies making products that will just exist for 5,000 years, and then they throw their hands up and say, well, we're done with this transaction, but our product can never be recycled and will cause cancer for generations. Seems like a little tricky to swallow. And, like, maybe we ask them to be better stewards and partners in this world with us. Maybe they take a little responsibility. But that's something I could absolutely talk about for a full hour. So I'll rein myself back in. But with all that in mind, are there any reasons to feel like hopeful? I mean, is there any progress that's like that we can point to, or is this just an uphill battle that we're going to fight forever? And either answer is fine.
I think, honestly, the toxic chemicals are some of my work that I feel the most optimistic about, in part because, as you said, Tom, people are becoming way more aware of them. Like, my mother, who never engages really in anything, like, sends me PFAS articles all of the time. Or like when there's jokes on SNL, and like, which also there's jokes on SNL about PFAS. It's like in the consciousness. And also, I feel more optimistic about these chemicals because they're so bad for everyone and they're everywhere for everyone, which makes me feel like it's more likely for things to get done, versus like some of my endangered species work trying to like save a small animal that no one's ever heard of that lives in one place and like no one's ever seen because it only comes out at night. And that animal's super important too.
Is that the Eastern Hellbender?
Yeah. We know me so well. And so, yeah, but so like, right, like in terms of as an environmentalist, I feel like people have an idea of environmentalists, is right, that people really excited about salamanders or owls, which are awesome and I love a lot. But in terms of like things everybody cares, nobody wants their kids to be drinking milk that's full of PFAS, but
Right.
that's what's happening in the United States because that's what the cows are eating the crops grown out of. I think it's something that is more likely to be addressed because it impacts all of us.
Right. It's like, I don't mean to be so glib, but it's like it needs to affect the rich too, like, yeah, I mean, and it is glib, but I think it's maybe a little bit accurate too. Do you want to talk about the Eastern Hellbender while we're here? Because wildlife and critters are so close to my heart. And yeah, it's been a while since I've talked about the Eastern Hellbender. And tell me about that work.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask everyone to pause their podcast, stop whatever they're doing, and Google a picture of an Eastern Hellbender.
If you're driving, please pull over to the side of the road right now. Don't Google Eastern Hellbender and drive. We really mean that. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. See, again, we forgot about the drivers. And so they're not cute, but I think they're cute. They're like ugly cute. They're
They're
very
ugly
small.
cute. They're cute. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are salamanders, which if you aren't familiar with that part of the animal kingdom, those are amphibians, which means they live in waterways and they breathe through their skin. And they really are these incredibly important species because since they're like filtering water through their skin, they are very reactive to chemicals or
Mm,
changes in their ecosystem. So they're kind of, to mix my animal metaphors, the canary in the coal mines for if a river system is healthy. Appalachia is where the Eastern Hellbender lives, and it's getting harder and harder for them to survive, in part because of chemicals we've talked about, in part because of climate change, in part because of habitat destruction. And so they have become an endangered species, which in the United States is currently protected under the Endangered Species Act. Fish and Wildlife Service has been taking steps to like officially protect them because I guess I think I made an error in which the hellbender is becoming endangered, like
okay.
designated as an endangered species, which like factually they are. However, we need the regulations so they're officially protected under the law, which is like a nuance there. And so, yeah, so like that's really exciting. And we're hoping that the Fish and Wildlife Service will finalize those regulations so this really valuable species is protected. And also in part because this species will lead to the protections for a lot of other ones too.
Right.
Everyone may actually find cute as well.
So the charismatic megafauna and the ugly cute fauna as well. I mean, and they're all, as I said, wildlife is very dear to me, but it's important. Everything is important, and they're all none like. I have these conversations with my 3-year-old. He's like, "Is that animal nice or mean?" And with the exception of dogs, I'm like, they're not nice or mean. They're just animals doing their thing, and they don't. I don't get this far into it with them, but because usually like gets distracted. But it's important. These animals don't need to serve us any purpose. They're just doing their hellbender thing, and the canary in the coal mine is an apt thing because what I find is that when we protect the Eastern Hellbender or anything cuter, you're actually protecting yourself and your children and your families and your neighbors. Because what's good for the animals is like we're animals, we do well with clean water and clean air as well. So if we have to think about it selfishly, protect animals because those same protections will end up protecting yourself and your family and your community. So just something that I think about. I wanted to ask you this question at the top, but I guess I'll just ask it now. So why do you do this work? Like what makes you come into the office every day? What makes you open your laptop and take on these huge but very worthy battles?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are in this work can give you like stories about like an idyllic childhood along a river, which I can do
Okay.
because I'm from the small town in Colorado. But I think the real honest reason, like, I think so maybe that's why I started being interested in it. But the real reason
Mhm.
why I still open my computer every day, despite the world in which we live in, because it's very tempting to just like not look at the news any given moment, is that what's happening isn't okay. People like, my family members grew up, like, downwind from Rocky Flats, which is where they made nuclear warhead arsenals, and now most of them have cancer. And so, like, we come from frontline communities where we had no choice about what happened to our bodies, what happened to our environments, what's happening in our own homes, and we should. And I think are also principles that I don't think anyone really should disagree with regardless of their political views, because I don't think anyone likes being told what to do. And I don't think anyone likes having things happen to them that they didn't agree to. And we just have to continue to explain that to people that like A, this is the way this actually is, and B, it doesn't have to be, and it impacts all of us. And so that's a fight I'm always happy to participate in.
Well, on behalf of everyone listening and everyone not listening, the whole world, thank you for taking on that fight. And I think I wanted to end with something hopeful. And I
Yeah.
think you really did when you said it doesn't have to be this way. And I think that's, to me, it feels very hopeful and empowering. And so that I appreciate that sentiment. And I appreciate this whole conversation, obviously, but I appreciate that, I guess, closing sentiment. Well, Chelsea, my colleague, my friend, thank you so much for being here today. I feel like we have had a really great introduction to what this series is going to be all about. I could have talked for an hour on like 5 different topics, but more to come as we roll out more episodes of this series. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Waterkeeper Alliance podcast, Equity in Every Drop. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and visit waterkeeper.org to learn how you can get involved and help support our mission to make waterways cleaner, healthier, and accessible to all. Every drop counts. Until next time, I'm Thomas Hynes. Thanks for listening.